They whip, they flip, they create more G-force than a fighter jet. Their names bespeak terror, the beast, anaconda, cyclone, raptor. For 500 years, amusement park designers have straddled the line between entertainment and danger. Now, buckle up for the thrill ride, roller coasters on Modern Marvels. A summer evening at the Santa Cruz Boardwalk. The temperature is down from the heat of the afternoon. A calliope is singing inside the carousel. The Ferris wheel turns and fits and starts, its riders hanging nervously in space. A breeze has picked up and swirls all the familiar aromas of the park together in a single pleasing aromatic breath. Popcorn, cotton candy, corn dogs, and the oil and gear scent of heavy machinery. An amusement park, whether a traditional boardwalk midway or contemporary theme park, is a feast for the senses. There are good things to see and eat, games of skill and games of chance, rides that whirl and lift and make you laugh. But for those seeking real thrills, there is really only one attraction in the amusement park. It's the undisputed king of the park, the roller coaster.
The Giant Dipper roller coaster was built in 1924 by a man named Arthur Loof. It is the 7th oldest roller coaster in the United States, and we think it's the best. Definitely our most popular ride here at the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk. I think people just love the speed of it, they love getting the air time, and they also love being able to go up a 70-foot hill and then go down it and look at the beautiful Pacific Ocean right next to it.
On any given summer's day in parks all over the world, you can find a scene like this one. A trainload of people strapped side by side into harness for a ride that they hope will scare the daylights out of them.
I think the thrill is what they're all about. It's the thrill in thinking that you're on the edge or slightly over the edge. That's what it's. You're paying for the thrill. That's what you want to be. You want the thrill.
For the next 2 to 3 minutes, they will be subjected to heart-stopping drops, bone-rattling turns, and exhilarating speed. On a roller coaster, it's every man, woman, and child for himself.
Riding a roller coaster is an unusual experience that is unique to riding a roller coaster. And you share it with 24, 30 other people. And it's just 2 minutes of controlled chaos.
The worst part for me is the hill because I don't like drops, but yet I still go on it because I still like the thrill of it.
When the ride at last comes to a halt, most of the passengers will be laughing. Most everyone will be happier than they were a few short minutes ago. Troubles and cares have been relegated, for a moment anyway, to a distant back burner. For centuries, people have sought thrills from gravity, building artificial hills and then coasting down them on one conveyance or another.
We don't know the name of the first person who built a roller coaster, but it happened in Russia nearly 400 years ago when an enterprising St. Petersburg showman discovered people would actually pay money to be terrified. He built wooden slides, covered them with ice, and would charge people to slide down the hill on small sleds. Coming down the hill, they would reach speeds of 40 to 50 miles an hour. This was a 70-foot ice slide.
These artificial hills were known as flying mountains, but as the conception spread to other parts of the world, they would come to be known as Russian mountains.
Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia, so enjoyed the pastime, she wanted to ride during the summer and ordered tiny wheels added to the sleds. The French soon adopted what they called Russian mountains, and in the early 1800s began operating in and around Paris.
The French version of the Russian mountains was very steep, which made for a hair-raising descent. There were many accidents, and if they wanted to ride again, the passengers faced a tedious climb back up to the top of the hill. But the first recorded instances of injuries to passengers did not discourage the riding public. In fact, news of the accidents actually increased the ride's popularity. 13 years later, another ride, the Russian mountains at Belleville, featured a welcome development. The cars were locked to the tracks by wheel axles which stuck into grooves along the inner walls of the tracks. The same year, 1817, the Area Walks opened in Paris. This ride was an improvement over its predecessors as it featured two separate but continuous tracks and a guardrail to prevent cars from going over the edge. Two cars started at the same time, one on each side, and before long the French were wagering on which one would get to the bottom first. Attendants would push the cars, often filled with passengers, back to the top of the hill. This encouraged re-rides, and passengers began buying great lengths of tickets. In Paris, early in the 19th century, an attempt was made to pattern a ride after the Loop-the-Loop, a popular toy of the time. A single car ran down a 100-foot slope before performing a 13-foot loop. The ride was tested with various items: sandbags, eggs, a glass of water, then a monkey, and finally a workman for whom a collection was taken up beforehand. The workman was not harmed, but the ride was too uncomfortable for the general public. By the mid-19th century, Russian mountain rides were out of fashion in Europe, and roller coaster development came to a halt. For 20 years or so, it would lay dormant until 1872, when a little coal mining switchback railway in Mauch Chunk, Pennsylvania, suddenly found itself obsolete. The Mauch Chunk Railway, powered only by gravity, had been built in 1827 to carry coal down from the quarry at the top of Mount Pisgah to the canal at Mauch Chunk. But as the mine spread out, the switchback's usefulness was diminished. Originally, mules were used to haul the coal cars back up the hill. After each trip, they would walk down the mountain to wait for another load. For some reason, the mules didn't mind pulling the coal up the mountain, but balked at walking back down. A car for the mules was added to the back of the train, and mules became the first passengers on the Mauch Chunk line.
Well, it didn't take long for the mine operators to discover what the mules had already realized, that in fact, rolling downhill, powered by gravity, really is a lot of fun. By 1873, all the coal had been excavated from the mountain, and the railway was converted over completely to passenger use. The ride was set in a beautiful, heavily wooded section of central Pennsylvania, and it was not only an enjoyable ride, but it was also a scenic ride, especially in the fall with the leaves changing.
Just 1 year after it opened as a tourist attraction, 35,000 riders paid 50 cents each to ride the Mauch Chunk Railway.
The layout was a giant 18-mile-long figure eight. During the home stretch, the train reached speeds of nearly 60 miles an hour. During this time, people rode on park benches, there were no lap bars, there were no seat belts, and during its years of operation, from 1873 until it closed in 1938, no one was ever injured riding the Mauch Chunk Railway.
Soon after the success of the Mauch Chunk Railway, a number of imitation coaster courses appeared. One of these, built indoors above a skating rink in Haverhill, Massachusetts, featured cars coasting over a series of closely spaced rollers. It is here that the term roller coaster is thought to have originated. In the 19th century, amusement parks were built by trolley companies at the end of their trolley lines as a way of getting people to ride trolleys on summer evenings and on the weekend. The most famous of these was Coney Island in Brooklyn, New York. At the turn of the century, Coney Island was the amusement mecca for the world. In 1900, a good-sized Sunday crowd at Coney Island was 100,000. By 1914, a hot Sunday pulled in 1 million. The hot dog was invented there. Charles Dickens claimed it was the only place he liked in America. Harry Houdini learned his trade there. Russian writer Maxim Gorky called it fabulous, beyond conceiving, ineffably beautiful. George Burns, Irving Berlin, and many others first appeared there. 3 separate enclosed parks, Steeplechase Park, Luna Park, and Dreamland, opened at Coney Island at the turn of the century. Patterned after the Columbian Exhibition of 1893 in Chicago, these new Coney Island attractions charged admission, featured a midway and concessions, and would define the image of the American amusement park for decades. One of the visitors to Mauch Chunk in the early 1880s was an inventor from Indiana named Lamarcus Thompson. Thompson was intrigued with the idea of an excursion ride solely for amusement. He had been designing toys from a very early age. At 17, he was already a master carpenter. In subsequent years, he had enjoyed moderate success in the wagon and carriage business, and for a time manufactured ladies' hosiery. The strain of business took its toll on the man, and following a near breakdown, Thompson resolved to pursue only work which gave him pleasure. He returned to his first love, inventing, and was soon designing amusements for parks and seaside resorts. In 1884, Thompson opened a small switchback railway at Coney Island. The 600-foot-long attraction cost 5 cents to ride and had a top speed of 6 miles per hour. Cars were placed at the top of a 50-foot incline and released. They would travel down the hill and up another, coming to a halt. Then workers would switch them to another track, and the process would be repeated. The ride was actually more of a viewing tour of the park area than an exciting ride, but it was so popular Thompson was able to recoup his entire investment of $1,600 in 3 weeks. But Thompson's Coney Island monopoly lasted only a few months. 2 more competing coasters were erected there. One by Charles Alcock was like Thompson's, offering a slow excursion, but it was innovative in that it returned riders non-stop to the starting position. Another ride built by Philip Hinkle featured cars that were lifted by a chain elevator to the starting position. Parkgoers abandoned Thompson's switchback in favor of this new, more exciting ride. The race to build the fastest and most thrilling roller coaster had begun. Lamarcus Thompson was quick to respond to the competition. First, he revamped his suddenly antiquated Coney Island ride to incorporate the advances made by Alcock and Hinkle. Over the next 3 years, Thompson patented 30 improvements to the gravity ride.
It was really a time of experimentation in the late 1800s. People were just trying to come up with all different types of thrill rides. Coney Island sort of was the laboratory for inventing new roller coasters and new rides, things that had never been dreamed up before. The word started to spread that there was money being made on these things, and other different engineers and architects got involved in building bigger rides. As we came into the 20th century, amusement parks were growing. Everybody wanted to have a roller coaster.
After the success of Coney Island, Thompson threw himself into the construction of what would be his most famous invention, the Scenic Railway. It opened on the Atlantic City Boardwalk in 1887 and became the most popular and famous amusement device in the world. It was the precursor of today's theme park rides, as the passenger was conveyed through elaborate artificial scenery, beautiful grottos, and biblical scenes.
Scenic railways were very popular around the turn of the century. It was a time in American history when electric lights were just becoming popular, and riders on a scenic railway would go into a darkened building. Once in the darkness, the train would hit a switch, the lights would come on, and riders would encounter either a pastoral scene or perhaps something intended to startle or frighten them.
Thompson recognized and exploited all the ingredients of a successful amusement ride. His coasters combined an appearance of danger with actual safety and allowed the public to intimately experience the Industrial Revolution's new technologies of gears, steel, and dazzling electric lights. He also paid careful attention to capacity, a factor he quickly learned was critical to a ride's survival. Lamarcus Thompson thought his rides helped humanity by offering a substitute for other degrading forms of amusement.
Many of the evils of society, much of the vice and crime which we deplore, come from the degrading nature of amusements. To substitute something better, something clean and wholesome, and persuade men to choose it, is worthy of all endeavor. Roller coasters are sunshine that glows bright in the afterthought and scatters the darkness of the tenement for the price of a nickel or dime. Lamarcus Thompson.
The new century brought with it the age of experimentation. The skies were dotted with innovative gliders and kites. The Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk in 1903. Adventure and instability were the keys to the new century, and the roller coaster was caught up in it. The patent office was deluged with amusement park inventions. Some of the most treacherous, blessedly, were never built. Others were shut down by lawsuits. Speed, boldness, and recklessness were part of the era, and coaster designers, in order to keep up with the times, abandoned the aesthetics of Thompson's slow-moving scenic railway in favor of new daredevil devices. The newly available automobile upped the ante. Coasters needed to provide more thrills than the average person could experience in his own car. The circus became a proving ground for acrobatic stunts and daredevils. Roller coaster designers looked there for inspiration. One of them said,
"Show the customer that he can be a circus acrobat without getting hurt, and they'll line up at the ticket booth for hours." Andy Brown, coaster builder.
The early years of this century found people fascinated with flight. Amusement ride designers worked hard to create the illusion of flight and sell it to the public. Coaster designers used a sense of theatricality to create illusion. The ride up the first lift hill was intentionally slow and drawn out, creating apprehension. The car was allowed to dangle at the top to emphasize the height. The cars plunged through a maze of wooden trestles which exaggerated the feeling of speed, and as the momentum decreased, the cars were thrown into tight curves to disguise the fact that they were slowing down. John Allen of the Philadelphia Toboggan Company, legendary builders of roller coasters, said,
You don't need a degree in engineering to build roller coasters. You need a degree in psychology, plus courage. A roller coaster is as theatrically contrived as a Broadway play.
Imagination combined with technology to foster a wealth of eccentric ideas. Rides like the Tickler were laid out like a giant pinball machine and featured intentional collisions with posts and other cars. Or the giant aerial drop, which dumped passengers almost vertically 35 feet into a pile of cushions. Or the Mystic Screw, which lifted passengers 100 feet inside a huge rotating screw and then launched them in darkness down a spiraling track to the bottom.
No one oversaw the amusement industry. There was no type of regulation, and a lot of designers, maybe not with the capabilities they needed to try certain things, just went ahead and did it. So there were accidents early on in the amusement industry. Just like the Wright brothers, a lot of accidents.
Coaster historian Robert Cartmel writes, "The endurance of riders was being tested. Never before had nerves been so rattled for a fee. Never had passengers been so dumped and scrambled. It was curtain-raising time for the ultimate illusion to reappear, defying gravity." It had been 50 years since the Parisians had tried a looping ride. Now another circular loop called the Flip Flap opened at Sea Lion Park in Brooklyn. 2 passengers were seated in a single car that ran from a hill through a vertical loop at its base.
The forces required to keep riders in their seats were so severe, many people suffered neck and back strain, and because the ride capacity was so low, just 2 people per trip, it was not profitable, so the early looping roller coasters soon disappeared.
The amusement park, and especially the roller coaster, had proven financially successful. The race to build more of these attractions gave rise to a new breed of entrepreneur, the designer-builder. These men were at once artist, engineer, and laborer. John Miller, an industrious young man from Illinois, began building roller coasters as a young teenager. At 19, he became chief engineer for Lamarcus Thompson.
Roller coasters kept getting faster, however, they weren't safer until 1912 when John Miller patented the first underwheels for coaster cars. Underwheel is a wheel that kept the car locked to the track so that it could not come off. Now, coasters could go faster and higher and tighter turns and do it safely.
Between John Miller and Lamarcus Thompson, nearly every important roller coaster idea was initiated. Drawings by Thompson and Miller flooded the patent office.
Miller also introduced the concept of a safety dog, which was a ratchet that the coaster car would drag along as it went up the hill, and if it started to come off the lift hill, it would catch on a ratchet between the tracks, and this would keep the car from sliding back down the hill backwards. The safety dog makes a distinctive noise, a clanking, that you'll hear on coasters today as you ascend the lift hill.
The public's demand for more exciting rides spurred on designers like John Miller toward more radical designs, and now some were going too far. They were building coasters too terrifying to ride. Riders of the looping flip-flap coaster at Coney Island in 1895 experienced forces of up to 12 Gs. Astronauts begin to black out at 6 Gs. The Roaring Twenties appropriately became the golden age of the roller coaster. The public seemed no longer interested in the silly and eccentric novelty rides of the pre-war period. Now they were looking for flat-out thrills, and coaster designers were eager to indulge them. John Miller's safety patents had given designers what they considered carte blanche to test the limits of roller coasters. And the public, rather than crying caution, rewarded each new harrowing advancement with increased patronage. Only building codes, insurance companies, and bare shreds of social responsibility on the part of designers kept rides short of disaster and mayhem.
The 20s was definitely the golden age of roller coasters and roller coaster designers. It was a very competitive time. Some people attribute it to the fact that World War I was over. People had money, people wanted leisure time, and parks were growing all over the country.
During the 1920s, there were more than 1,500 roller coasters operating in North America alone. Coasters kept getting built bigger, faster, and wilder. Some of these notorious coasters remain today, such coasters as the Coney Island Cyclone, that classic coaster against which all others are compared.
In 1920, John Miller teamed with Harry Baker, another coaster man. The pair built more than 50 coasters together in a space of just 3 years, going their separate ways in 1923. Miller would continue to build coasters for the rest of the decade. Baker would build only a few more, but one of them would be his gift to the world and remain to this day perhaps the most popular coaster of all time, the Coney Island Cyclone. Cyclone was then and still is a popular name for a roller coaster, but there is only one Coney Island Cyclone. Built in 1927 by Baker from a design by Vernon Keenan, this coaster is revered by many buffs and experts as the quintessential roller coaster experience.
The Coney Island Cyclone is probably the most famous coaster in the world and probably typifies what was happening in the industry in the 20s. It was built under very competitive terms. They had just opened up a ride a year earlier in Coney Island, had to surpass that. It was promoted as having the steepest drop, and to this day, I think it still has one of the steepest drops on any coaster. Even all the modern ones still have not gotten much steeper. It's about 58.5 degrees, very sharp turns. And I remember when you used to buy a ticket to ride on it, even to this day, you turn it on the back and it would say, steepest drops, sharpest turns, fastest speeds.
Harry Traver was a former school teacher who had worked as a mechanical engineer for the Denver Tramway Company and later designed the first mechanically drawn fire engine for New York City. Seagulls got me into this crackpot business, Traver liked to say. Watching seagulls sail around a ship's mast had prompted him to invent a ride called a circle swing. The ride consists of suspended cars around a center tower. It caught on immediately with the public, and some originals are still standing today. But the amusement ride Traver came to be known for most is the roller coaster. And although revered for classic coasters like the Bobs and the Aero Coaster, Traver is more closely identified with three of the most savage coasters ever conceived, the notorious Cyclones.
Harry Traver designed three coasters, very similar in design, the Cyclone at Crystal Beach, Cyclone at Palisades Park, and the Lightning at Revere in Massachusetts. And they're extremely violent rides. They actually had a figure eight on it that the ride took at top speed, and it was banked at about 70 or 80 degrees. Knowing what I know about coasters and never having ridden them, I can only study photographs, and it looks like they easily pulled in excess of 5 Gs on a rider. Today, we don't like to exceed about 3.5.
In 1927, Traver's fearsome triplets were born.
The Crystal Beach Cyclone was the only roller coaster that had a nurse on duty at the loading platform full time, and with good reason. As the train came down the first 97-foot drop, it veered 85 degrees to the right. People would lose hats, combs, purses, false teeth. They'd be thrown into the riding partners cracking ribs. A number of people fainted until by the end of its 20 years of operation in 1946, many more people were watching than actually riding the Crystal Beach Cyclone.
The Revere Beach Lightning in Revere Beach, Massachusetts was built by Harry Traver. It looked like a very intense coaster from the pictures that I've seen of it. It only existed for about 6 years because the second night it opened, a person was thrown from the car and was killed. And after that, people pretty much watched the ride, but were too afraid to ride it. And so it was not profitable, and the park tore it down.
I think part of the reason why these rides were so violent was because they didn't really have the capability to generate the design data they needed to really do them right back then. Sort of a hit or miss thing.
As the 20s progressed, the testing ground for coasters moved from Coney Island to Riverview Park in Chicago. Here, designers like John Miller, Harry Traver, Frederick Church, and Fred Pierce took up temporary offices, shared ideas, and combined to construct some of our great classic coasters. One of the finest coasters ever erected at Riverview was Harry Traver's and Frederick Church's collaboration, the Bobs. When the Bobs opened in 1924, many declared the quest for the perfect coasters to be over. The Bobs wasn't the tallest or the fastest or the most terrifying, but its inventive twisting and turning layout made for a delightful ride. By the time it was torn down in 1967, over 30 million people had ridden on it.
I don't believe that a roller coaster has to be really large to make it a good ride. The basic factors that make a ride thrilling are the pace of the ride. And the pace is not necessarily the overall speed. The pace of the ride is how quickly things change, how quickly you go from positive Gs to negative Gs or weightless, how quickly you go in and out of turns, how unanticipatable the ride is. And a smaller ride can often do that better than a large ride.
Another classic coaster that epitomized the rides of the 20s was the Aero Coaster at Playland in Rye Beach, New York. Another Traver design, the Aero Coaster combined speed, height, safety, pacing, and fright, as well as any ride in history. It was demolished in 1957. By the end of the decade, there were between 1,500 and 2,000 roller coasters in North America. The rides at the zenith of their popularity seemed to symbolize the vigorous American spirit of the times, adventurous, always wanting to go faster and higher. But the high-flying roller coasters, like America herself, were headed for a fall. The Depression of the 1930s put an end to the golden age of roller coasters. The mood of the country changed. The early innocent years of the century had given way to a tougher, harsher world. Keeping a home together in the Depression left little time for amusements. With less revenue for coaster maintenance and accident insurance, hundreds of coasters were torn down and very few were built. Material shortages in World War II exacerbated the problem. Coney Island, on the other hand, fell victim to its own success. In 1920, with the completion of the subway, unprecedented crowds jammed its beaches and midway. Lines to the Thunderball, Tornado, and Cyclone reached 3 to 5 hours long. Since re-rides were allowed, the lines hardly moved and tempers flared in the summer heat waves. Fights started when people began cutting in line. Several ended in murder. Finally, the politicians, led by a supervisor who hated amusement parks, stepped in and began rezoning the area for housing. Little by little, the great park was eaten away. You can still ride the Coney Island Cyclone, but the park itself is a ghostly shell. As the years passed, one by one, the great parks fell to the wrecking ball. Coney Island, Riverview, Palisades Park, the Long Beach Pike. Sadly, most of the great coaster designers of the Golden Age lived to see their greatest creations torn down. It would be 25 years before the amusement park and her star attraction would rise from the ashes, courtesy of a movie animator with a big dream. In 1943, a man stood up on the Crystal Beach Cyclone and fell to his death. His family sued, but the judge dismissed the case after a maintenance man put his bulldog on the ride and it returned happy. In 1923, a 22-year-old Walt Disney had arrived in Hollywood with $40 in his pocket and an idea for a series of animated short films called Alice in Cartoonland. Subsequent creations like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck were successful, and by 1938, with the release of the full-length animated feature Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Walt Disney had established himself as the foremost animator in the world. For years, while he built his studio, Disney had dreamed of a new venture, an amusement park unlike anything existing at the time. A park far removed from the dirty, phony places run by rough-looking people which typified, he thought, what the amusement park had become. He had tossed around the idea for years, but it began to solidify when he built a miniature train course around his backyard and then decided it should surround a park. Disney studio business partners were not interested in financing such a grand scheme on the back of the always struggling studio, so Walt went it alone. Construction for Disneyland began in 1954 with the uprooting of 160 acres of orange groves in Anaheim, California. The park's design had been carefully thought out and researched. Disneyland would be an enclosed park with one entrance. It would have a coherent, orderly layout, wide streets and walkways, and plenty of food and entertainment. Rather than compete with each other for attention, the attractions would complement each other. And most importantly, Disneyland would be clean. Walt wanted it spotless. Disneyland's success was immediate. It opened in 1955 and over 1 million visitors attended in the first 6 months. In July of 1965, the 50 millionth visitor walked through the gate. In 1959, Disney commissioned Aero Development, the firm that had designed many of Disneyland's theme rides, to build the Matterhorn, the first roller coaster to be entirely constructed out of steel. The new cars ran on nylon wheels over rails made of tubular steel. The strength of steel vastly expanded the possibilities for roller coasters. Twists and turns could be more dramatic. Loops could be added, first one and then in combination. Disney's success had proven amusement parks were once again a moneymaker, and soon other theme parks were developed on regional themes. Six Flags, Busch Gardens, and Taft Broadcasting with Kings Island soon appeared on the scene. In 1961, the first of these, Six Flags Over Texas, opened in Arlington, Texas, and soon after introduced a runaway mine train constructed from tubular steel. Mine trains are throwbacks to the early tunnel and scenic coasters, which featured quick changes between daylight and darkness and lots of dangerous-looking imagery. The popularity of the mine train rides convinced park owners that thrilling attractions were essential for a park's success. The stage was set for the return of the roller coaster.
Amusement parks are just like any other form of entertainment, whether you go to the movies, you go out to eat dinner, whatever. The amusement parks are looking for their little part of people's disposable income. So we sort of have this competition going on between all the parks around the world to have the highest, tallest, longest, fastest roller coasters. And that brings in more people. It's been a proven fact that the roller coasters can increase your attendance 20, 30% in one season.
Five decades had passed since roller coaster designers had attempted to turn passengers upside down. Now, in 1975, tubular steel made it possible to carry enough passengers to make a looping coaster financially viable. But there was still the problem of excessive G-forces on the rider. A Swiss company, Intamin AG, solved the problem by reshaping the loop from a circle to an ellipse for Magic Mountain's Revolution. The physics of the improved shape relaxed the G-forces and made for a more comfortable ride. Now it was no longer a matter of whether to loop, but how many.
The combination of corkscrews and loops ignited a roller coaster arms race, which continues unabated to this very day. Coasters kept being built bigger, faster, more convoluted, and each park rushed to have the bragging rights to having the biggest or craziest coaster, at least for 1 year.
Some of these rides go upside down as many as 7 times, and there is a limit. We are putting real live people on these things, so 7 seems to be about the limit for a comfortable ride.
By the early 70s, roller coaster enthusiasts had divided into 2 camps. Those who favored the traditional wooden coasters and those liking the new acrobatic steel rides. Traditionalists denounced the steel rides as inferior or not truly coasters at all. But ironically, the woodies owe their very survival to the metal coasters, for it was their popularity which led directly to a revival of traditional styles.
The wooden roller coasters we're seeing built today, I think, are better in many ways than the old wooden roller coasters they replace. Today's wooden roller coasters are being built bigger, faster, and in many ways wilder than before.
The wood coaster experience is more of a freedom experience. You're more free, you have a little bit more room to move around. Sometimes you can actually see better. And you get that feeling of the old nostalgic coasters, the clickety-clack of the tracks. And the steel coasters, you can do a lot more with steel. You can twist it in all different configurations, turn upside down many times over. You can suspend the cars from the tracks. But one of the things they haven't really done is give you a lot of freedom of moving.
People look for a lot of things when they ride a roller coaster. The real aficionados look for weightlessness. That's when you're going over top of a crest and your body weight is basically removed because you're floating. Lateral G's, positive G's, that's when you're feeling more than your own weight because of the curvature of the track. If a pull-out generates 3 G's, you will feel like you weigh 3 times your own body weight.
One of the best thrills on a roller coaster ride is moments of negative gravity, or what we call airtime, when you are literally lifted off your seat for moments during the ride. The more airtime, the better.
There's another whole game that designers play. You can bring riders very close to other objects. When you're going 40 miles an hour and your head is only 3 feet away from a bunch of timbers, it might seem more like 100 than 40 miles an hour.
It's a picket fence effect that makes you feel as if you're going faster than you really are. You may dive down through an overhead wooden beam, and the sense of imminent decapitation is there. Doesn't really happen, of course, but it adds to your apprehension.
Also, anticipation. You try to always manipulate the track in a way that the rider cannot tell what's coming up, or it comes up so quickly that they don't have time to anticipate for it.
A great roller coaster ride should provide nonstop action from the moment you drop off the lift hill until you return to the relative serenity of the loading platform. There should be no slow time, no moments to regain your composure. It should be nonstop action through the entire ride. Sprinkle in a few moments of airtime a surprise or two along the way, and I'll be one happy rider.
Technology and the new radical steel coasters escalated the coaster wars. And now the sky is truly the limit. But how much more thrilling and chilling can the human body take? The average theme park roller coaster now costs $5 to $10 million to build and usually pays for itself in about 2 years.
There was a mute man that came to Coney Island one time, and they had tried everything through this guy's whole life to get him to talk. Nothing worked. He took one ride on the Coney Island Cyclone, came back into the station, and when he got off, he said, "I feel sick." That was the first words he'd ever said in his whole life.
Everyone enjoys the imagined danger of a roller coaster, but they really are very safe. According to U.S. Public Safety Commission statistics, riding a roller coaster is safer than using toothpicks, safer than playing billiards, and safer than any other form of transportation. I think the moral here is if you use your own good sense and don't do anything foolish, you'll have a very safe but terrifying ride.
I believe we're in a golden age of coasters right now. There's a lot of people wanting them. They're starting to be recognized once again as the flagship type of attraction for a park.
If you're a coaster lover, this is a wonderful time to be alive.
Today, up-to-the-minute technology is being used to power and brake a new generation of mega coasters. Millions of riders all over the world can choose from and enjoy a tantalizing array of roller coaster thrills. Wooden coasters like the Hershey Park Wildcat in Hershey, Pennsylvania, or the Beast at Kings Island, Ohio. Steel coasters like the Magnum at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, or Joker's Revenge at Six Flags Fiesta in San Antonio, Texas. Racing coasters like Racer at Kennywood Park in Pennsylvania or Gemini in Cedar Point. Stand-up coasters like Mantis at Cedar Point or King Cobra at Kings Island. Suspended coasters like Montu at Busch Gardens in Tampa, Florida or Ninja at Magic Mountain. Mine trains like Mayan Mindbender at Six Flags Astroworld in Houston, Texas or Adventure Express at Kings Island. Free falls like Demon Drop at Cedar Point or Scream Sky Coaster at Six Flags Fiesta. Or even virtual reality coasters like Glacier Run at the Santa Cruz Boardwalk.
The future of roller coasters could go just about any way. I think roller coasters in general are built to deliver thrills to the nth degree. They want to take us to the limit and make it so that when you get off, you know you've ridden an incredible ride and you have a thrilling experience to tell your friends about, but at the same time keeping it safe. All of a sudden we seem to have a fascination with being dropped off of towers. Maybe incorporating a roller coaster into a free fall all at the same time might be another way to go. I think people have a basic childlike instinct in them. They want to go out and have fun. They want to be out of control.
Some roller coasters held special places in your heart that may, it's more than just a ride. It's maybe something happened in your life there, or maybe you met a girlfriend at a park that day and you rode the roller coaster together.
I've enjoyed riding coasters now for more than 50 years, and I will ride coasters until the day I drop.
The Santa Cruz Boardwalk is getting ready to close. The Giant Dipper is making its last run for the evening. Weary park patrons head for the exits. It's a good bet the kids will be asleep before the car's out of the parking lot. Tomorrow, the crowds will be back. A line will form again for the big coaster, the king of the park. The first-timers will stand fidgeting, waiting with anticipation and just a little apprehension. The veterans, too, will have cause for concern. Will the ride be as thrilling as they remember? Or will time and age and experience have diminished the ride's ability to surprise and delight? none of us deep in our hearts thinks we're truly old. On a roller coaster, we are forever young.